Hey everyone, welcome back to Midnight Musings. I'm Jess.
I'm Cassandra.
I'm Maria.
And I'm Carly, and today we're going to be talking about nudity and its use as a feminist act, if it's good or if it's bad, and more specifically, like the context of like nudity in social media, and also discussing specific celebrities like Emma Watson and Emily Ratajkowski, who have posed nude and who have really sparked this debate. So I think I just wanted to ask guys first, like, what do you guys think nudity is? Like, what rings a bell when you guys talk about nudity in your background?
Well, for me personally, like nudity just means like being naked, right? But in the context of like feminist theory, which is what we're focusing today, I think it's just really complicated to define when it's acceptable and when it's not, especially like in social media, right? Because women show up in social media with like this like explicit and like super scandalous clothing, and then people like it sparks criticism of what is this like girl doing, you know? So for me, it's just like a big complex that I don't know how to define, but yeah.
I think building off of that, like I feel like the definition of nudity sort of changes like throughout time. I think that like back in a time when like women used to dress like and cover like a lot more like in like daily life, I think that like the definition of nudity is obviously different then, and like now even like what's sort of acceptable, what's not, is like constantly changing, and so I think it is very much variable.
Yeah.
I think nudity has this real intersectionality to it, especially today, where in which you have a lot of different groups, different takes on what nudity is and what nudity isn't. And I think that for me personally, I mean, nudity in the media can be like very objectifying, can be very subjective at the same time, but it can also be like empowering in a weird kind of way. I personally don't post nude or anything like that, but I think that certain women or even men or people who are even non-binary actually post themselves and being empowered in nudity, and that's something that can be really inspiring. And so I think that I would definitely have to agree with Cassandra, like it's very difficult to define. And I mean, Carly, you're the one who's researched this, so do you want to tell us, like, what is nudity in media?
Yeah, so I think that nudity doesn't have to be like full like ass out, like tits out, like that, like explicit. I feel like it could be like in what I've been seeing, like any kind of like, I think that anytime a woman like doesn't like completely cover themselves up, and like even like for Emma Watson, for example, she did like a Vanity Fair photo shoot with literally just like a bit of cleavage and underboob, and that was like enough to spark this whole debate.
So was that nudity?
And yeah, I think that is considered nudity, but I think that I agree with what all you guys have been saying about like how like subjective it is, because it is like considered something differently. So I think that in like the context of like our discussion today, I think nudity would just be anything like where, you know, like any kind of like body part like is being exposed is what we're being considered. It could be more subtle. But yeah, and I think that your point on objectification and like sexualization and like whether or not it's empowering is like basically summarizes like the big question on nudity, because of course it can be empowering for a lot of women, and a lot of people that do pose nude think of it as something that's empowering. But on the other hand, it is something that is done that does put someone at the risk of being objectified by men, and like they're inherently going to be sexualized. So that's like a big thing to consider.
Exactly. I think on the empowering point, historically, a lot of women these days find nudity, I think, so empowering, because historically it has been something that is so covered up, quite literally, physically, metaphorically, and figuratively. And so being able to be empowered in that, I think, is something that really elevates women in today's society. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I just think it's a really complex topic, because as much as it is empowering, like we also consciously have this idea that if you put yourself in that position, exposing yourself like that, you're like out of the norm or out of what's right or correct. And that is a difficult topic to address, just because it's difficult to know where to draw the line, where I am expressing myself or am I conforming to societal norms.
Yeah, and I really want to jump in on that topic, because Victoria Bateman, who is, she calls herself a naked feminist, and she talks about this idea exactly. She coins it the cult of female modesty. And one of the major reasons why she's such a big proponent of nudity for feminism is because it breaks this cult of female modesty, which is basically just the idea that a lot of women are conditioned into having to cover up or like change the way that they speak or act or present themselves because of the way men think, and because of being afraid of men sexualizing them, they act in a certain way. And so that idea in and of itself is something that's really dangerous, I think. That's because it like controls a lot of the way that we think and have to act. And like, if we are always going to be like acting and like dressing because of men and because of being afraid of being sexualized, that is kind of really counterintuitive to a lot of like feminist ideas of equality or of choice, because if all the choices we're making is based off of men, then how are we going to be existing for ourselves and things like that. So I think that's really important, that like exposure and like that like balance is something that's really important. But I think that nudity is something that definitely breaks this like stigma of having to be modest, which is something that's really important in and of itself.
I think something that I wonder though is like these celebrities have like millions of followers online, and when they like pose nude or like post a picture of themselves onto their platform to these followers, are they really doing it for themselves, or like is the impact that like so many people will see this a reason, implicit or explicit, behind like why they're being nude? Because then that sort of like fits into the like male objectification, and like even though it's like breaking the cult of modesty, in other ways it might be reinforcing these like patriarchal, like sexualized notions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because even just like thinking about like us as like college students and like us going out, like at parties, like women aren't dressed with like scarves like all around them, like covering everything up. Like we're usually dressed in like more scandalous outfits, I would say. And I think that like kind of plays into that point of like the reason behind it and like how we're dressing and everything. Like, is it truly for ourselves, or like do we want to be seen like all like those celebrities with millions of followers? Like, do we want to be seen by others, and like do we want to have like comments of people being like, wow, you're so sexy and things like that. And so I think that that's also interesting, because one of the major points of why Victoria Bateman says it's so like important is because it allows us to gain agency over our body and like are able to do these things for ourselves and not exist for men. But at the same time, a lot of the reasons, like subconsciously, I think, of why a lot of us, like a lot of women do pose nude is because they kind of do, I guess, in like a twisted way, want to be sexualized and like want to be viewed as like wanted by men, you know?
I think
this is really interesting.
This is really reminding me of OnlyFans.
OnlyFans?
Yeah. No, but in a weird kind of way, the fact that we can now commodify nudity to a point where in which women are not only having this kind of weird dichotomy between existing to empower themselves and existing to empower the man, but then also being able to make money off of it. I mean, how does that kind of fit into this whole discourse? Does OnlyFans intersect with social media in this space, or is this like a totally different topic?
Yeah, I think that that's actually very interesting. I haven't considered that before, but I think that OnlyFans in it is something that's really like intriguing, because in the same, like in a way you are empowering yourself, like actually you're making money off of this, you're like gaining a big following, you're able to like make a big name out of yourself, but at the same time it's like actually sexualization of yourself, and like you're literally posting pictures for men.
I feel like my view on that is like you're not going to change the perspective of women and men, you know, like just in our society it's just really hard to change people's minds. So if you already know that you're going to be sexualized, you're going to be objectified if you post this picture with like a very like low cleavage, right? Maybe OnlyFans is just a way of accepting this mentality and women just being like, I'm going to do it, and in that case I'm just going to benefit, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that, and I think it like fits in with like a lot of like the like academic arguments for it, because it really is like at the end of the day it's about like female choice and like equality and the sense of like us being able to make decisions for ourselves. And so I think that like by doing all of those things we're still able to like, it's still representative of like women like stepping out of that, like breaking free of those chains of like having certain expectations placed on them or like behaving in a certain way, and like also like the modesty culture, and it also breaks the stigma of being naked, I think, and like that we shouldn't have to be limited of like only benefiting, I guess, from like our brains and things like that. And like a big point as well that Victoria Bateman makes is like using her body and her brain as a means of furthering feminist ideas and like not just having to be limited by like words. She can like use other things as well to be able to like convey all those messages, which I think is something that's
The thing that I wonder though with OnlyFans and other mediums like it,
mm-hmm.
what is different from OnlyFans versus someone like Emily Ratajkowski or Kim Kardashian who has millions of followers, who genuinely profits and commodifies her body on a daily basis, posting nude photos or exposing kind of sentiments online, profiting from that. You know, how is that, is it innately different? Is that the same thing? You know, how does that kind of thing intersect? And I do understand we're going to be delving into Emily Ratajkowski in like another one of these little sessions very shortly. But I mean, if you want to start touching on Emily Ratajkowski, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think Emily Ratajkowski is really interesting in this regard.
Ratajkowski.
Because she like is an example of someone who is literally benefiting from this. And I know Maria, you're gonna touch on this later, but yeah, and so like when she posts all of these things, she is like benefiting from that, and so we do have to take that into play. But I feel like the idea of benefiting from it shouldn't be something of like a reason why it's not good for feminism or why it's like not considered a feminist act, just from like the nature of someone benefiting from it. And I think like at the end of the day, the most important thing is like just like breaking the cult of female modesty and like not having those expectations and being able to like not face like being afraid of these things because of men and like using not like having any of those criticisms and actually like despite all those criticisms being able to like post nude is like I feel like a very powerful act that allows a lot of like sets an example for like young women and also like just like women in general that you don't have to be afraid. And especially like figures like Emma Watson and Emily Ratajkowski who have like a large following and are very influential. I think that even the fact that they're doing it shows that it's like not something like in the past in history. A lot of people think that like if you post nude, you're like cheap or like unworthy or like it's something that's like only like people that are not well respected would do. And so I think the fact that they're very well respected celebrities that do these things also shows that like a lot has changed since then and that it's something that can be empowering and allows you to be able to exist and do what you want for yourself. Yeah, but I think with that and like Emily Ratajkowski, I think that's a good stopping point for today. And yeah, so thank you for listening to us today, and we're excited to delve into our next Midnight Musing episode, which is going to be more on Emily Ratajkowski.
Awesome.